glory to Jesus Christ, and welcome to this week's episode of God with Us Live. Every week, we're joined by men and women, monastics, clergy, and laity, exploring exciting and inspiring ways to live our Eastern Catholic faith today. Your host is Father Deacon Nick Medelsky, a husband, father, and deacon of the Ukrainian Catholic Eparchy of St. Nicholas. And now, here's Father Deacon Nick.
Hello and welcome once again, God with Us Live listeners. Father Deacon Nick Medelsky, pleased as always to be here with you. We're in the middle of the Great Fast for those of us on the full Gregorian calendar. And one of the common practices that we engage in during the Great Fast, during Lent, as in addition to fasting and prayer, is of course almsgiving. And there are a lot of worthy causes for us to give our alms to. Of course, God with Us online is one of those causes, but also I thought we would take some time to spotlight an organization that's doing a lot of important work, especially for our brothers and sisters in the Middle East, as well as in Ukraine and even India. And we'll find out more about that in today's show. My guest today is a man who is very intimately aware of what goes on there at CNEWA, or the Catholic Near East Welfare Association, as well as the Order of the Holy Sepulchre. And we're going to talk about both of those today. So very excited to welcome my guest today, Michael Civita.
Thank you, Deacon. It's great to be with you and your guests and your listeners.
So for our listeners, I could go through a long biography, but I always like kind of having my guests introduce themselves because who knows you better than yourself. So if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and tell our listeners a little bit about you and, just a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, I grew up in actually the homeland of the Ruthenian Church, what I call the homeland of the Ruthenian Church, which is Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a small steel mill town actually called McKeesport. And grew up there and left Pittsburgh in the late 1970s with my family and ended up settling in Virginia and went to college in Richmond, where I studied basically the development of the Byzantine icon and its impact on later Russian art of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. There's no question that my childhood in Pittsburgh and many of my family members who were either Carpatho-Russian Orthodox or Greek Catholic, their culture, which became part of our larger culture in Pittsburgh, if anyone who has been to a football game or a baseball game knows that halushki and halupki are an important part of our diets, despite our ethnic differences. And so I studied that and thought that I would enter the priesthood and focus on the Eastern Catholic churches, and decided that really poverty was not my calling, and so actually became very poor by working for the Holy See as a member of the Catholic Near East Welfare Association, which was founded nearly 100 years ago by Pope Pius XI to work specifically among the Eastern churches, Catholic and Orthodox, in their various pastoral and humanitarian endeavors. I joined the staff in 1989 as an editorial assistant, and I probably am still very much that as the team and my responsibilities have expanded over these many, many years. It was only supposed to be a 3-year stint until I could figure out what I wanted to do as an adult. And here I am almost 35 years later as communications director and executive editor of one magazine. So that's a little bit about myself and how I ended up here. For those who don't know, CNEWA or CNEWA is headquartered in New York, and it is, while an agency of the Holy See, it is under the episcopal supervision of always ex officio of the archbishops of New York. But yet
Mm.
we are very much a part of the dicastery, or the old sacred congregation for the Oriental churches, now called the dicastery for Eastern churches. So that is who we are, who we report to, and our work basically is to connect people, mostly here in the West, to the churches of the East. We serve as a network to empower those churches to live the gospel, or as they live the gospel, as they preach and teach and heal and witness the gospel.
Well, fantastic. I know I've seen some of the material from CNEWA that I just found out today. That's one of the ways to pronounce the acronym for the Catholic Near East Welfare Association. Um, One of the things that I noticed when you look at the website for CNEWA is the areas that you serve, and some of those areas would be outside of what I would traditionally consider the Near East. I think a lot of people think of the Middle East, for example, as the Near East, but
Yeah.
obviously the mission of CNEWA has evolved over 100 plus years, as happens with a lot of institutions within the church. So, could you talk a little bit about how that mission evolved for CNEWA, how it kind of started. You mentioned how it was started by the Pope, right, with a specific focus, and then that's kind of expanded geographically, at least.
Well, it's interesting. In 1924, actually 1923, I'll go back that far. There was a treaty that was signed and called the Treaty of Lausanne, and they called for an exchange of populations in the Ottoman Empire, the Turkish Ottoman Empire, which was then centered in the great city of Constantinople, which we know today as Istanbul, Turkey. And with this exchange of populations, you had basically Greeks and Armenians and Assyro-Chaldeans, Christians, who were being basically forced to move from one area, and Muslims moved from one area to another, an exchange of populations, as it were. You also had a breakdown of the Ottoman and the Russian Tsarist empires, and so Constantinople became a center of refugees, many fleeing genocide, what today we know as genocide, Armenians and Assyro-Chaldeans in particular, as well as white Russian refugees fleeing the horrors of the Civil War that followed the abdication of the Tsar and the Bolshevik coup d'etat that later followed. And so there was a Greek Catholic bishop there who was close friends with a priest, a friar of the atonement, not too far from here in upstate New York. And Father Paul Watson, who is the founder of the Greymoor Friars, was very concerned about these refugees, and set up with Bishop George Kalavasi, his name was, of the Greek Catholic Exarchate in Constantinople, the Catholic Near East Welfare Association, which was an attempt on the part of the American Church to collect funds, provide Bishop Kalavasi with those funds, so that he could meet the very real needs of those refugees who had basically piled into Constantinople and were seeking to leave. And so the Pope was so moved by this, and it was very successful. Within 2 years, the organization, which is now celebrating, that organization is the predecessor of the official CNEWA, raised $1 million, and the Pope was so taken aback by this that he reinstituted it as a papal organization and placed it under the congregation. And what he did was he kept the old name, Near East, and Near East was an English term. Um, uh, Basically, as you point out, Deacon, very well, something that people understand, certainly those in Europe and in the United Kingdom, understood to be the Middle East. And the Pope wanted this organization to reach not just Christians and others who were in need in the Near or Middle East, but all Eastern churches. So when he reestablished the organization or instituted it as a papal organization, he added to that Russia, or the former realms of the Tsar, and Eastern Europe, as well as India and Northeast Africa, those places where the ancient Eastern churches originated. So we retained the name, which is an impossible name, even especially 100 years later to understand, but we're sticking with it for obviously because that is what we are. We are known for now 100 years. We're not very well known even among Eastern Christians in the United States. Our greatest strength, which is our invisible nature, is also our greatest weakness. We don't don hats when we don't fly into affected areas wearing hats and t-shirts that say CNEWA and we're here to help. We're actually always there because we empower the local church to do the things that they need to do. We are not, the great hope of America coming in with all of our know-how and money and telling other people how to do things. Very different. We're very quiet, and we have to be because oftentimes we work in places of conflict or places where the church is not free to operate. And we do so quietly, but yet effectively in working with the local church to provide the aid that needs to get to where to those who need it most. And as we all know, it's the parish priest, it's the matushka in many of our churches, it's the mother of the parish, the priest's wife who understands this. It's the deacons and their wives, it's the lay leaders. The local church knows best who needs help, and not necessarily just members of their parish. So that strength of ours, though, is also our weakness, because in this day and age, you need to be well known in order to get any attention, in order to raise money, frankly.
Well, and that's an important point you bring up because in my experience working in with nonprofits and things like that, that's always I think a lesson a lot of the bigger nonprofits are slowly coming around to realizing that a lot of aid that can be provided to different areas in the world, it's important to connect with the local people rather than trying to, run aid programs out of an office in New York City or something like that, right? And kind of a top-down model to really have more of this supporting the grassroots efforts that are already there, right? And really helping the good work that people are already trying to do, right? They just need, financial assistance or whatever it is to keep doing the great things that they're doing.
Precisely, Deacon. They need, sometimes it's not the greatest assistance that we provide is not necessarily financial, but it's connecting. It's putting people, again, we're great connectors, a network. It's putting those who may have the resources or, which is, of course, know-how as well as financial, to solve something. So for years when we were rebuilding villages in Lebanon after the Civil War, yes, we were providing a significant amount of aid, but we also have engineers that we were putting in touch with the mayors and with the people on the ground so that they could design different things like agricultural feeder units, basically infrastructure that would allow for water to reach difficult areas and sewage treatment plants and very important things that sustain village life. And that was important to us because we didn't want the Christians to be fleeing the rural areas that are historically historic, make up an important historic community, but make those villages have them return to viability and to restore that really that wonderful idea that Lebanon is. It's a mosaic of peoples and cultures who had historically coexisted, and not just coexisted, but commingled and depended on one another. It was a program that even the United States government was very impressed with and used and adapted as a model elsewhere, beginning with how we did this on the ground in Lebanon in 1993.
Wow, that's fantastic that CNEWA can serve as a model to other organizations in kind of implementing that sort of strategy to really, again, like you said, not only provide financial aid but also the networking and kind of the just connecting people to help them work together and use share resources and things like that. Sometimes an outside organization can help with that. I can also kind of anticipate some of our listeners hearing this and going, that's great work. It's great work that CNEWA is doing, but what differentiates CNEWA from, say, the Red Cross or some of the charities that, maybe some of the other secular humanitarian organizations out there? What's the importance in today's day and age of an organization like CNEWA?
Well, what we do is we witness the gospel. That's what makes us different. We work entirely through the local church. Entirely. So it's the religious sisters, it's the brothers, it's the priests, it's the deacons, it's the lay catechists, it's the lay leaders who've been educated in our Catholic schools, it's seminarians, it's religious. They're the ones who are doing the work with the local community. That makes it different. Why? Because it's not just social work. Yes, it's social work, but this is our this is what we understand to be the social teachings of the church. We live the social teachings of the church. We understand what we mean by subsidiarity, of empowering the local community and allowing things, as you say, to surface at the bottom and rise up, not governed top down. By doing that, what we're doing is living the gospel. We're living the Beatitudes. We're answering the call that was put to Jesus, in the story of the Good Samaritan, and who is my neighbor. That's what makes us different. As a result, I think of, for example, the Chaldean or the Iraqi Dominican Sisters of St. Catherine of Siena. When ISIS stormed through those villages, not just Christian villages, but many of them were Christian villages, in the Nineveh Plain in August of 2014, the nuns quickly, well, of course, they organized families, villages, entire villages, organized basically what was a flight to Kurdistan, Iraqi Kurdistan. And once they were there, they began to do a census to make sure that everyone was accounted for, to ensure that no one was left behind, and to find out if there were folks who had been left behind, who they were, was there any contact, etc. They worked ceaselessly. They're still working. I think anybody else as a social worker would have been burned out and exhausted. Now, this is not to say that they weren't exhausted. They were exhausted, but somehow they kept plugging along. They kept doing incredible things, not just for 3 months or 6 months or 9 months, but for years. That is something that is an incredible testimony, witness of their faith in Christ. That's what makes us different. They were effective. Because of that witness, because of that effectiveness, even the UN on the ground looked to them, not just as models, but wanted to work with them because what they were doing was so effective, and it's all fueled by faith. That's what makes us different.
Thank you for sharing that story. I think it really helps to understand concrete examples and what amazing work those sisters were doing. The difficult time, Iraq has been had a lot of difficult times within,
Yes,
especially the 21st century, right? So God bless
yes.
those sisters for doing that great work, and CNEWA for supporting that work in any way possible. Uh, so for those of our listeners who might be moved to maybe get involved with CNEWA, what are different ways that they could get involved or learn more about CNEWA and then kind of support the mission?
Thank you, Deacon, for that opportunity. Number one, pray. It's the first thing we ask people to do is to pray for peace, to pray for justice and a lasting peace, because as St. Paul VI reminds us, there can be no peace without justice, and justice for all, not just for one. So we ask for prayers. We ask prayers for generous prayers. We also, too, ask people to get informed, to be careful curators of what they read. Don't believe everything you read, and be careful of your sources, especially now in this age of artificial intelligence. There's a lot of stuff on Facebook, on social media, that is, frankly, deacon garbage. Don't get your news from social media. Please, for the love of God, go to your Catholic publications, frankly. There's a whole host of them out there. Tune into podcasts like this. Read your local diocesan newspaper or magazine. Check out Catholic magazines like America, like National Catholic Register, like National Catholic Reporter. There are different variations, different ideologies, or not ideologies, but perspectives. But nevertheless, you'll get a Catholic, meaning a universal understanding, a broader understanding of what is happening in the world. Go to Vatican News, which is an amazing site filled with information. I look at it every day, as well as looking at the Washington Post, the New York Times, and Catholic News Service, and our Sunday Visitor. All are good sources of information. And also to our own blog and magazine. One magazine, of which I've been the editor for 30 some years now, is celebrating its 50th anniversary. It is considered one of the finest publications in North American Catholic media, wins awards consistently, significant awards from secular and religious journalists annually. It's available in its entirety, and with even actually a lot more on our website at www.cnewa.org. We have our quarterly publication is there, called One, but then we also have our blog, which is also an award-winning, it's not a gossip column. It actually has material that is published in Spanish, in English, and in French, available to all. It's really quite good. Right now we have some interesting things regarding the anniversary of the unfortunate, as we enter into the third year of war in Ukraine. An interview with this incredible Basilian sister who is doing amazing work on the front lines of Zaporizhzhia in southeastern Ukraine. It's an interview with her. We have an interview with a soldier also from Ukraine, who has suffered horribly, but somehow has maintained his faith, and that faith has fueled him and helped him to recover from the horrors of the battlefield. But there's also something that Catholic journalism provides, Deacon, that no other source of journalism provides, and that is hope. As Christians, we cling to hope. And there is hope, and we need to have that hope, otherwise we despair. The third way that people can become involved is to give. If it's $1, $5, $100, $100,000, giving of time and talent and treasure is very important. It helps us to get so much more done. And because we work with priests and religious and lay people who are motivated by the gospel, we're not paying huge salaries. We're not paying the funds that we collect are not going toward operating costs that are astronomical, but rather they go right to where the need is greatest. We have a great reputation as such, as a good steward of goods, and we're transparent, and all of our financial statements are available online, again, at www.cnewa.org.
Once again, cnewa.org. Just a fantastic organization, again. And if it was great to hear a few of the stories here today, but like you said, looking at one magazine that can really give you even more insight into the great work that CNEWA is doing. Like you said, a lot of it kind of flies under the radar because it needs to, right? It needs to be able to get into those areas where there's conflict and other things going on. So sometimes you might not hear about it. You're probably not going to hear about a lot of the great work that CNEWA does in any of your usual, secular news sources. So it's always good to look at that magazine to get a little more information on what exactly CNEWA is doing, because they're really it does two things in my mind. It really gives an insight into areas of the church that you may not know are suffering the way they are, or at least, going through difficult times the way they are. But also, it doesn't just leave you there. Like a lot of, secular news sources, in my experience, will leave you there with this feeling of dread and the world is terrible and things like that. But reading the articles on CNEWA's magazine really lets you know that there's hope too, that there are people there who are doing something, right? And doing something to help and doing something to improve the situation as best they can. And also give you an opportunity to be part of that good work, right? By supporting CNEWA with your prayers and with your finances, if that's something prayerfully you discern you're able to do. So thank you so much for talking about this great work. And um, we're going to take a short break here, because when I was doing my research, Michael, for having you on the show, I saw that you're also very involved with the Order of the Holy Sepulchre, the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre, and I thought it would be interesting to talk a little bit about that, especially from the perspective of the Eastern Catholic churches in the Holy Land, and kind of talk about the great work there. So if it's okay with you, we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk a little bit about that.
Very good. Thank you.
Well, stay tuned here on God With Us Live as we learn about our Saint of the Week.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Scenes with the Saints. Do you know which saint sold the same blanket 3 times to raise money for the poor? Saint John the Merciful was born into an important family in Cyprus during the 7th century. Following the wishes of his parents, he married and had children, but when his wife passed away, he became a monk. He was revered by all classes of people for his asceticism and love of neighbor. This fame led the Roman emperor and all of the clergy to beg John to become the patriarch of one of the most important sees in the ancient church, that of Alexandria. John took his responsibility as patriarch very seriously, caring for both the spiritual and the physical needs of his flock. One of the first things he did after becoming patriarch was to send servants throughout Alexandria to find all of the poor and outcast in the city. When the servants returned with a list of over 7,000, St. John arranged for each and every one of them to receive daily alms from his treasury. On Wednesdays and Fridays, St. John would sit on the steps of his cathedral to hear the needs of anyone who approached him. He would settle arguments, correct injustices, and distribute alms to those in need. Despite his generosity to everyone else, St. John lived a very humble, ascetic life himself. Hating to see a man who gave so much to everyone else live with so little, a wealthy landowner in Alexandria decided to give St. John a richly embroidered and very comfortable quilt. Out of respect for the man and gratitude for his generosity, St. John went to bed that night with the new blanket. However, he could not sleep at all, tossing and turning all night thinking about those who slept in the cold and didn't have any blankets at all, while he was covered in such a luxurious one. He thought the blanket must be worth a lot of money that could be used to buy over 100 warm blankets for people who really needed them. So the next morning, St. John sent it off to be sold. Seeing his gift in the market, the landowner bought the quilt and brought it back to St. John, begging him to allow himself this one luxury. However, the next day, St. John sent the quilt off to be sold again. The landowner again bought it and brought it back to St. John. The Holy Patriarch looked at the landowner with a twinkle in his eye and said, "Let's see who gives up first, you or me." St. John knew the landowner was very wealthy and could indeed afford to keep buying the quilt over and over again, or simply give money directly to St. John to distribute to those who needed it. Realizing this, the landowner gave up trying to make the patriarch comfortable and instead gave generously to the poor. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Scenes with the Saints. Join us again next time when we learn more about the lives of these holy men and women.
Welcome back, God with Us Live listeners. Father Deacon Nick Medelsky, excited to be here with you as always. And we're speaking with Michael La Civita. We talked a lot about his work with CNEWA, a great organization, the Catholic Near East Welfare Association, and the great things they do for Eastern Christians, Eastern Catholics, Eastern Orthodox in Eastern Europe, as well as the Middle East and Africa. Eastern Africa there, the Ethiopia, Eritrea region, as well as India, kind of those, seats of the ancient churches. But also, as I mentioned before we went to the break, one of the things I found out doing my research before this interview is that Michael is also very involved with the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre. And I thought that's kind of interesting. I've known a few people who've been involved with those knights. But I thought it'd be great to talk here on the show about what they are and also about how kind of they support the Eastern churches as well. So, Michael, who are the Knights?
The Order of the Holy Sepulchre is a worldwide organization now of about 30,000 men and women, Catholics all, who have basically embraced a cause, and that is to support the Church of the Holy Land, the churches and peoples of the Holy Land specifically, with a special attention to the Mother Church of Jerusalem. The order is, like I said, it's about 30,000 members today, but its origins are in the Crusades, very similar to, say, the Order of Malta and the Knights Templar. But instead of brandishing swords and lopping off heads, what we do today is actually the cross is our sword, so to speak, as an instrument of healing. And so we support the local churches in Jerusalem, obviously the Church of Jerusalem, but also the Church of Antioch. The original mandate was to support the Latin Patriarchate of Jerusalem when it was reconstituted in the 19th century by Pope Pius IX. Now that mandate has been extended to include all of the biblical Middle East, and to support all the churches, Eastern as well as Latin, not just Catholic but also Orthodox. So it's really it's an incredible organization. In the United States, we have 9 lieutenants. We're broken into, like the church is broken into eparchies in the Eastern tradition or dioceses in the Latin tradition. Well, the order in the United States falls under what they call juridically lieutenancies. And so here in New York, the order was first founded in North America in New York. And it's called the Eastern Lieutenancy, but there are lieutenancies in the Southwest and in the Southeast and in the North, North Central, Northeast, far Northwest. I'm sure I'm missing one or two, as well as lieutenancies in Canada and one in Mexico. And I serve, thanks be to God, as the lieutenant, the head of the lieutenancy for Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and the Bahamas, of all places. And really grateful because I have about 3,000 members who are very committed to their local churches, very committed to supporting their local parishes and their dioceses. We have Latins, we have Maronites, we have Melkites, we have Greek Catholics of a whole host of churches, jurisdictions, and we get together in our local churches to support one another, but most importantly to support the work of the church in Jerusalem, in the Holy Land, in the Middle East, which we consider 11 an object of hope, a model of hope for all peoples. The vast majority of people who are served by the order or served by the institutions of the church are not even Christian. And that's the same, of course, with Catholic Near East as well.
So we've talked about serving the populations, like you said there in the Holy Land. What what actually does that look like?
So, for the Order of the Holy Sepulchre, it means schools, um, schools throughout Gaza, for example, and Israel proper, and the Palestinian territories in the West Bank and Jordan. It also means educational programs in Lebanon, in Iraq. It also means providing formation support to religious sisters and seminarians. For example, there are two seminarians from the Latin Patriarchate who are studying at St. Joseph's Seminary in Dunwoody, New York, as part of their college experience, their seminary experience. They're studying philosophy. The order also provides, when it and where it's needed, emergency relief. Right now, there are only two parishes, churches in Gaza. Gaza is an overwhelmingly Muslim uh, territory, but yet it's the site of one of the oldest parishes in the world, which is Greek Orthodox, and there's also a Latin parish. The order has been assisting both of those parishes in getting first aid, in getting water and food supplies, as they house not just Christians but families from the neighborhood seeking shelter. Um, um, we're talking about innocent men and women and children whose lives have been turned upside down. And it takes other forms as well, retreats and support of youth programs, so that we are ensuring that the next generation of Christians understand what it means to be Christian in a region where it is increasingly difficult to live as a human being, but also to live as a faithful disciple of Christ. And then we do other things like support families, or those folks who are survivors of trafficking. This is something that is a major issue in the Middle East, particularly in Israel, with migrant workers who have who have fled to Israel after horrific tales, after horrific experiences of fleeing Sudan or Eritrea or other horrific wars in Africa, and who come to Israel, luckily alive, but oftentimes with children and no forms of support. And so the order has provided the local church with tremendous support in helping those women to basically with psychosocial care and counseling, as well as faith formation, and healing. That's what they're looking for. That's what they need, as well as nursery care for their children. And does the same in Jordan, for example, with the Filipino population who work as nurses and domestics, and many of them are in very difficult labor situations. So the order it's a very relevant, even though we, as the Cardinal likes to say, we wear capes and drapes and all sorts of funny hats and costumes. It's a very, most importantly, its charism is very relevant to the world today. What it does is significant.
So for people listening, I know the Knights aren't, like the same as signing up to join the Knights of Columbus or some other organization like that. But I guess I have a two-part question. So for those who might be interested in what I guess the question is, what does it take to become a member of the Order of the Holy Sepulchre, and then also, do you have to be a member to support the good works that you guys are doing in the Holy Land and in the Middle East?
No, you do not have to be a member, deacon, to support the order. Not at all. We have plenty of non-Catholics. Again, one must be a Catholic in order to belong, but we have plenty of non-Catholics who believe in what the order does and are very close friends here and abroad, um, and support the order in its ministry. To become a member, one has to be nominated by a member in good standing, and typically that is done always in the local church. So, for example, if you go, typically members of the Order of the Holy Sepulchre are invited to to attend, not just attend, but to function on Good Friday in the Latin tradition, the service of the Holy Cross, to venerate the Holy Cross. You'll see men and women in capes and veils, and those are members of the order who have typically been invited by their diocesan bishop. For those of us who are not Roman Catholic, I always suggest contacting your bishop, because we're reaching out more and more. I know the Maronite bishops in both jurisdictions in the United States are very close to the order, as is the Melkite bishop. And I'd like to see more and more. Archbishop Boris in Philadelphia knows of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, knows us well, and I'd like to see more and more from our own Ruthenian tradition. Well, it's not my tradition, but it's Latin Catholic, but I feel like I'm part of the Carpatho-Rusin family, being from that part of the world, and having great affection for the Greek Catholic Church in Parma and Pittsburgh and Van Nuys and Passaic. So, and Phoenix. So, definitely contact your local bishop if you're interested, and they can help get the ball rolling for you in terms of membership. It's a it's not a difficult or lengthy process, but it's a continuous process of formation. It's not something one enters into and takes years and years and years, but actually it's really something that one enters, and it takes your life to really understand and to become part of this organization that does so much good work on behalf of of God's people in the Holy Land.
And before we go, I was wondering if maybe you wouldn't mind sharing what being part of the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre, what the Order of the Holy Sepulchre. I'm not sure on that. I mix up the terms in my head, but which what has it meant to you personally to be part of this organization? You talk a little bit about how long you've been a part of the order, and now you are the lieutenant, right, for the Eastern Lieutenancy. Obviously you're quite involved with the organization, but could you just speak a little bit personally, I think, about what it's meant to you and how you've sort of, I guess, grown through the order?
It's a difficult question because it's so part and parcel of my professional work at CNEWA, because the order and CNEWA do collaborate on so many things together. I feel as if I've been part of the order for 35 years, even though I have only been a member since 2009 and lieutenant since October, actually officially October 14th of last year. But it's been a part of my life for more than 3 decades. And I guess what amazes me always is, and always reinforces, number one, how good people are. I know that's hard to believe in this day and age, but but God's creation is good. And yes, there's a bad egg here and there, but even those bad eggs, there's a reason why they're a bad egg. Um, yes, there are bad people, certainly. I'm not naive. But through my many years of involvement, the goodness of people, the generosity of people, the kindness of people is extraordinary. And to be honest, there isn't a group of people more generous than Americans. I hate to say that, but it is absolute. Never, never, ever, ever ceases to amaze me how American Catholics especially respond to a crisis. There's no other group of people like it in the world, and so we're talking about men and women who are helping their parishes to add wings or to merge somewhere else or to grow their grade school or to help their Catholic hospital or to help the sisters do yet another pastoral initiative or help their local religious. That's who the members of the order are. They're involved in everything, and they keep saying yes. They don't say no, and that is that in a day and age um, when we hear so much about how our faith is irrelevant or how our church is not what it used to be. My experience is, nah, I don't believe it. Because there's more dynamism, there's more generosity. It's unheralded. Perhaps that's wishful thinking on the part of some, but they bring the church alive, and that keeps you rooted. That keeps you not just rooted in faith, but it bolsters you and helps animate you, and it helps you grow and want to be better. So that's what it's meant to me, just to be a part of a company, as I like to call it, a company of men and women who are united in their love for the church and for Christ and for the gospel.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that, and I can obviously I can hear it in your voice. Just like you said, it's really for me personally, it's really amazing to hear to hear about these things from your perspective and from the perspective of the organizations you're involved with, because like you said, yes, there are a lot of bad things happening in the world. There's a lot of evil being done, but it's being met by a lot of beautiful things and a lot of wonderful things that people are able to do. And like you said, a lot of generous people are willing to step in and help. And I think that's really where they have that quote from uh, Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers, who he said,
Yes.
look for the helpers, right? And that's something that I think CNEWA and you've really done a great job of reminding us of, that as easy as it is to focus in on the bad things happening in the world today, we should be putting our focus on the people who are, really showing the love of Christ to others by really stepping up in these situations and doing amazing things.
Couldn't have said it better, Deacon. It's yes, it's all about the helpers. Last night, uh, we had a concert. The Catholic schools in Staten Island put together a concert for peace. I think there were 500 people in this packed auditorium in this Catholic high school in New York City. We had almost a dozen schools participating in this concert where they sang for peace. Each school talked about a country where CNEWA works and how the church is involved and what they're doing, and then sang a song. Grade school kids. Um, and of course the audience is packed with their parents and their teachers, and this has been an ongoing program that Monsignor Peter Vicari, who is the president of CNEWA, who's also an active member of Holy Sepulchre, has been working within this high school and with the Archdiocese of New York. And it was an incredible thing to witness. The helpers here were children,
Mm, right.
animated by what they learned about the children that we serve throughout not just the Middle East, but in Ukraine and Armenia and Georgia and India and Ethiopia. and they were motivated and moved to do something, and they did this, and it was absolutely beautiful, a remarkable thing. And they were the helpers last night. Actually, if anyone wants to watch it, you can, because it's available. You can see it on our blog at cnewa.org. A beautiful story about an incredible event that happened just last night. So the helpers can be children. They can be people who are homebound praying the rosary or making novenas. The helpers are all of us, and we all do it in many different ways. And that's the beautiful thing about being a follower of Christ.
And once again, if you'd like to find out more about CNEWA, support their great work, the website is cnewa.org. Again, cnewa.org. And sometimes I forget this is a podcast, so I'll also put the link in the show notes. So if you're listening to this on podcast, you'll be able to click the link right there and find out more about it. Once again, thank you so much for joining us today, Michael, and really sharing your perspective on all these things. And like you said, that there's the good news, I guess, that there is great work being done, and that although these are difficult times, there are great things being done.
Certainly are. God is good. Always remember, God is good all the time.
And thank you for listening today, God With Us Live listeners. It's always a pleasure to have you here with us on our show, talking about the wonderful things going on in our Eastern Catholic churches and around the world. God bless.
For this week's episode of God With Us Live. Make sure to tell a friend or two about us and subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. Don't forget to follow God With Us online on Facebook and Instagram for even more great content about the Eastern Catholic churches. And don't forget to check out all of the other great Eastern Catholic podcasts at godwithusradio.org, where faith meets life. God With Us Live is a production of God With Us Radio, hosted, produced, and edited by Nick Modelski. Send us a message at info@godwithusradio.org.